you. Very good. Well, I'm glad to be here. Y'all can handle Louisiana accent, huh? Well, I like Nebraska. We drove through a lot of corn to get here. And there's something wholesome about Nebraska. And I'm going to say flat out, Nebraska doesn't deserve the death penalty. You're not really serious about doing it anyway? I come from one of the 10 southern states that practice slavery, and we do 80% of all the executions. And you've had the death penalty, and the legislators put it on the books. Yeah, we got the death penalty in Nebraska. And since 1976, you have killed 3 human beings, done in your name. You have 11 on death row. You're not serious about really carrying it out. And there's a good reason why you're not really serious about carrying it out. And I'm going to tell you this incredible story of grace. It's my story. It's the way God wakes us up, and then the way God leads us. And we have an aphorism or a maxim in our community that says, never leap ahead of grace. And if I'm not a surfer, in the Gulf of Mexico, our waves are a little bitty. I mean, there's nothing to surf on. But I learned how if you get one of those styrofoam things and you can tuck it right at your waist, and the wave comes, and if you ride it right, it'll take you all the way in to the beach. And so it's like responding to grace when grace happens, the way God comes into our life, and then riding it all the way into the beach. So let me tell you this story. I'm a sister of St. Joseph. I'm a Catholic nun. I'm a child bride of Christ. Joined the nuns when I was 18. Wanted to give my life to God. Glad I did. It's been a ride ever since. Wanted to know how to pray. Wanted to know how to be close to God. Wanted to know how to be able to discern in the things of my life when God was speaking, or when it was just Helen, or when it was ego, or when it was something else. And always learning. Wanted to be a teacher. Our sisters in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, were wonderful teachers. I loved being a teacher. That's why I became a nun. So packed all my things, my family, my good Catholic family, had grown up, Our Lady of Mercy Church, going to Mass, being fed by the sacraments, daily rosary in our family. Every time we went on a family trip, we would say the rosary. So the kids in the back seat were getting rambunctious, and somebody's poking somebody, and they're saying, everybody calm down, Mama, she's going to start another rosary. Too late. And there's Mama. There's in the name of the Father and of the Son. And here we go, and we sing the rosary. And I mean, after 150 Hail Marys and going through the joyful, the sorrowful, and the glorious mysteries of the rosary, I mean, it's probably like Catholic Ritalin when you're traveling. I mean, rosary's good. And you know, the good part about it was you could be uproarious with your brother and sister, and then the next minute you learn that what prayer is just what Father did with us tonight. Just stop a minute and silence, and God's that close when we turn to God. So learning how to pray, and then joining the sisterhood. And Vatican II happened in the Catholic Church, and nobody took Vatican II more seriously than the nuns, because Vatican II was saying that we got to get out with the people and hear the needs of the world and respond to the needs of the world. And we all heard it, and so we began to do just that. And everything, I became the director of a religious ed in the parish. I'm writing about all of this right now. It's a spiritual memoir. It's called River of Fire. And I'm praying not to drown in this book, because it's like 40 years of life, and there's a lot to be said. So I definitely need the guidance of the Holy Spirit in it. But the most serious challenge then, where I really got upset, was when the whole issue of social justice came up in the community. And y'all picture nuns, and nuns are great. I mean, I love my community, and I'm standing here today because I'm a sister of St. Joseph And when you belong to a community, you always are learning. You can never stay in one place. Things move. And we were having a rip-roaring debate about where's our place. Because the civil rights movement had happened. Vatican II had called us to read the signs of the time, to be involved with the poor, to get involved with justice. And I just didn't get it about that justice thing. I said, we are nuns. We're not social workers. I mean, you know, we pray. God takes care of the big problems. How are we going to help all the, what? We're going to start getting involved with public housing and the schools and justice this and racism that and all that kind of stuff? Our job is to pray for people and to help people find God. And I'm making tremendous statements like, well, if the poor have God, they have everything. And Jesus said, not by bread alone do people live. Now, of course, you know, I don't know any real poor people because I never had served with poor people. And so I did in my mind what I think a lot of us do. We tend to romanticize the poor, or we just say those poor people are going to the dogs. Why don't those black families get together? Why are they, well, you know, all this? Because at a distance, it's so easy to make those judgments. I was in there. I was kind of like the little girl in a way who wrote that essay one time. Because I'm out in the suburbs of New Orleans. You got the inner city, 10 major housing projects. I'd never been to any one of them. And the main way I was meeting poor black people was just seeing them on the evening news. That's who's being put in the handcuffs, who's being brought off in the police car, drugs or violence or whatever. And there was this little girl who wrote an essay. It's called The Poor Family. Once it was a really poor family. The father was poor, the mother was poor, the children were poor, the butler was poor, the chauffeur was poor, the whole family was poor. And I could have written the blooming essay. And then the moment of grace, we went to a conference in Terre Haute, and a nun talked to us. Sister Maria Augusta Neal was her name. She taught at Emmanuel College in Boston for 40 years. What did she teach? Sociology. So she's got her feet on the ground, knows what's going on the ground, and the New Testament. And she came to talk to us. And I wasn't happy that she was coming to talk to us because we were all loaded in these buses. We were captive for 3 days up there at St. Mary's of the Woods. And you couldn't even go out for pizza. You're just there, and you got this nun. And I heard she was one of those social justice nuns. And I went, wow, well, with the grace of God, maybe I can come through on stage, you know. So the first day I did, Sister Maria Augusta Neal talked to us about the first world countries and the rich countries of the world, the poor countries of the world. And I knew the statistics. I knew that things weren't fair. I know that we have more than we need, that we consume 25% of all the world's energy and resources, and others don't. But I mean, the world's always been that way. I mean, you know, you read Ecclesiastes, nothing is new under the sun. And so finally, God's the answer to things. So I slept well that first night, you know, and she announced that she was going to talk about Jesus the next day, and I had a good night's sleep. Because I said, oh, excuse me, but I do know a little bit about Jesus. What's she going to be telling me about Jesus? I mean, I'd even done a 30-day retreat with the Jesuits, the Ignatian exercise. Didn't talk to anybody for 30 days except God. Probably almost gave God a nervous breakdown. But I mean, you know, and I've been studying Scripture. I'd love to study the Scriptures and the Gospels and about Jesus. So what's she going to tell me about Jesus? And see, we never know when this grace thing is going to hit us. And here we are, all the nuns sitting in there, Terre Haute. Here's Maria Augusta Neal. Here she is talking about Jesus. And when the thunderclap hit me, I didn't move in the pew. I just stayed seated there. I didn't move, but I was changed forever because I came to understand something. And she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. And there were all my little lines going through my head. If the poor have God, they have everything. Not by bread alone do people live. And she said, integral to the good news that Jesus preached to poor people was that it was against their dignity to be poor, and that they should be poor no longer, that they should struggle against the injustice and poverty that was their life. And there were a lot of injustices and oppression that first century Palestine people. First, the Romans had their foot on their necks. And then Herod had his foot on their necks because he's taxing people, taxing the agriculture. Then he starts taxing the fishing because he's building these sumptuous palaces. And he's building Caesarea in honor of the Roman emperor. And the poor people were starving. They were taxed to death. And so when you go to talk about the good news of God's kingdom to people whose children are dying before they're 5 years old, or who don't have enough to eat, or who don't have work, and announce about the love of God, and it's like suddenly I got it, that Jesus was about justice. And the more I've studied the scripture, the holiness code in the Old Testament is about justice. And be holy as I am holy is connected to being there for the orphan and the widow and the immigrant or the alien. It was a patriarchal society. Widows couldn't be more vulnerable. They didn't have a man to protect them. Orphans didn't have a man, a father, to protect them. The vulnerable ones and the aliens are the immigrants coming into the country. And remember, you too were once an alien in Egypt. It was all about justice. And I just hadn't been awake to it. It's not that I was bad. It's not that I wanted to resist it. I just didn't get it. Because I thought spirituality was more about being holy, being close to God, teaching other people to be close to God. But when you see suffering and when you see the poverty, and see, the thing was, I never saw it. Because there's a way we can live in the suburbs and you can have the inner cities, and I just was never there. I am still glad that God woke me up. To be awake is a big thing. To come to understand something and to be called is a big thing. And I left Terre Haute, came back. It was the last year I was in formation with novices, and I moved into the inner city of New Orleans and lived among African American people that I had only known when I was growing up, because my daddy was a successful lawyer. We had a big house. The only way I knew black people growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was as our servants. I didn't even know Ellen worked in the house and Jesse worked in the yard, and I didn't even know their last names. I never questioned it that black people had to ride in the back of the bus. I didn't question anything. It was just the way things are. And that's what culture does. See, culture just says, that's the way we do things here. That's just the way things are. On the way to Angola, the prison, there's a big brick church. It used to be a church where the white plantation owners would go to church on Sunday. And guess what gospel they're hearing from the pulpit? Selectively going and quoting those parts of the scripture, which you can always do. And there's St. Paul saying, slaves, be obedient to your masters. That's not questioning slavery. It's not questioning about human dignity and what happens to human beings who are treated as property. And I began to realize, well, where have I been? And when I moved in among African American people in the inner city of New Orleans, for the first time then they became my teachers. And I began to recognize that what I had lived, not a bad person, a good person, basically, but it was a life of privilege. I was protected. I just didn't get it. I didn't understand. And believe me, I wasn't living there in St. Thomas housing projects longer than 2 weeks before everything unfolds quickly, that I could see there was a greased set of tracks going right out of the inner city straight to Angola prison. And as one of the mothers said, our boys leave this neighborhood either in a police car or a hearse. And I began to see direct connection between poverty and prison. And then I'm coming out of the Adult Learning Center one day, meet with somebody from the Louisiana Prison Coalition office. And Louisiana is the top incarcerator in the country. The United States is the top incarcerator in the world, and Louisiana is the top incarcerator of all the states, with that long legacy of slavery, where slaves were freed, weren't given any land, and of poverty that has endured. We have some of the highest statistics for adult illiteracy. And so you have poor people going right into the jail and the prison. So I'm coming out of the Adult Learning Center one day. Here comes a friend from the Prison Coalition office. And here's something that changes your life. It's an invitation of grace. Didn't have to do it. Maybe if I had met him that day, never would have done it. But he goes, hey, Sister Helen. And he had a clipboard. See, everybody he was meeting, he's asking them to be part of this little project they had going. Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal with somebody on death row here in Louisiana? I said, yeah, I was an English major. I could write some letters. I never dreamed they were going to kill this person. I thought I was only going to be writing letters. We got to have some T-shirts printed. Jesus is sneaky. Sneaky Jesus. Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky. Because I think, oh yeah, I'll write some letters. Look, I know this. I don't know much about the death penalty because I'm learning about all the issues. I didn't know anything about justice issues. But I knew this. You sitting on death row in Louisiana, you poor. I'm there to serve poor people. I'll be glad to write that man a letter. I wrote a letter. You know the problem? He wrote back. And this is grace where it connects like lightning. They're finding out from this photography that when lightning comes down, it doesn't just strike anyway. That this new kind of photography shows that there's a negative current, the opposite current that comes up from trees, comes up from buildings, and the lightning connects with that little current that goes up. And that's when we meet people, real people. And here's this man on death row. He writes back, his name is Patrick Saunier. And that is the journey that is in Dead Man Walking. I write a letter, I go and I visit him, I accompany him as spiritual director for 2.5 years, and he's killed in front of my eyes in the electric chair, and that changes my life forever. That's the journey. And in that journey, on the other side, and if I look at the crucifixion differently now, I never had seen Jesus as an executed person before I got involved with the death penalty. You know, the cross, we're just so familiar. You go into church and this is the symbol of our redemption. Jesus was executed by the stake. And I'm going to be on that journey with this human being, this man. And part of that was the victim's family. Because at first, it was just like meeting him. And the first visit, I record in here. I'd never written a book before, but I wrote it in present tense, so as it happens to me, it happens to the reader as well. I describe what I'm seeing and what I'm learning and what I'm feeling, and you're with me in it. And that first visit, I was scared out of my cotton-picking mind. I'd never been in a prison in my life. And you have to understand that New Orleans is real Catholic, and nuns get a whole lot of respect. We can even ride the buses free. You go in a restaurant, oh, sister, we'll pick up that tab. And I step inside this visitor center of the Louisiana State Penitentiary, and they had this great big green sign on the wall. It says, anybody stepping on prison property, subject yourself to body searches, dog sniffing, body cavities. I stopped reading the thing. And I mean, I'd never in my life been in a place like that. I thought, well, can't play the nun card here. Boy, they don't give a hoot about nuns or whatever. I mean, we're in dire straits here. And then the guard said, I'll take you to your man. I've never met this guy personally now. We've just been writing letters. I'm getting scared and scared as I go, like, anybody can write nice letters. Yeah, oh, sister, Jesus loves you, so do I. Yeah, I'm praying for your sister. The guy murdered somebody. I've never been with a murderer before. We got 2 hours. And I didn't know what the visiting situation was going to be. And I was relieved, I have to tell you that they had him locked on the other side of this heavy mesh metal partition between us. And I could hear him coming with the guard. And I could hear the chains drag because they have leg irons. His legs were chained and he had a belt around his waist and his hands handcuffed to the belt real tight. And then he rounds a corner and he comes in. They put him in a small booth and lock him on the other side. And I looked up through that heavy mesh grate and looked into the face of a human being. I had thought that if you murder somebody, your face must look a little different. I mean, you must look mean or something, your eyes or your jaw or something. And I looked at him and he was smiling. He said, "Sister, you drove all that way. Thank you for coming to see me." And I went, "My God, he's a human being." And I was given a grace at that moment that's never left me. And it is, I don't know yet what he did. I know he's murdered somebody. I presume then that everybody on death row they were guilty what they were. I know better now. When I wrote the second book, it's about two people I accompanied to execution that I believe were innocent. I know now we make a lot of mistakes. And mistakes anytime, as good as you are. In Nebraska, you're making mistakes too, because we're human beings and it's a fallible system. And we could handle most of it, I think, if we didn't get ourselves involved in absolutes. Like we're going to decide if you live or die. If we make a mistake and people go to prison, that's bad enough. But to make a mistake that we're going to kill you for what you did, and we made a mistake. We got the wrong one. There are 142 wrongfully convicted people who, by the grace of God and college volunteers and innocence projects, who have gotten off of death row. Some of them saved within just a few hours of execution. But I don't know anything about it all. I know here's this man, and we're going to visit, and we have 2 hours, and the next thing I knew, the guard saying, "Time's up, ma'am, time for you to leave." And it had flown by, and I had met a human being. And the grace was a realization. Whatever he has done, he is worth more than the single worst act of his life, as are we all. Or what is the message of the gospel of Jesus to us? There's certain acts out of which we can say you can never get past that. You are not worthy to live, and we're going to decide that about you, and you. And so then the visit was over. I'm driving back to New Orleans, and the journey began. And I got to know Pat Saunier, then I got to know his brother, Eddie Saunier. Know this, that when they made the film of Dead Man Walking, Tim Robbins, Susan Sarandon, Sean Penn, they got this story. They got this journey. Because you know what they do in this film? And this is a good filmmaker when they do this. They bring you over to both sides. That cross has 2 arms on it. And Jesus is right there in the center of it. And on one arm is the perpetrator who has done an unspeakable murder. And what are we going to do with him? Or what are we going to do with her? And on the other arm of the cross are victims' families. Innocent people they all wake up one morning and everything is just as it's always been. And by the time the sun sets that evening, they are plunged into this terrible mystery of grief and violence and loss. And we have a man sitting in here tonight, I'm not going to point him out to you, but we have these heroes, these clouds of witnesses among us. And his sister was murdered. And he has found a way past all that anger and all that bitterness and hatred, not to desire death. And ordinary people just like us who wake up in the morning and the victims. I don't even know the victims at first because I'm meeting Pat, I'm meeting his brother. He wasn't talking about it. And I figured, well, it takes a lot of trust to tell somebody the worst thing you've ever done in your life. I would wait till he trusted me enough. But then as the months went on, I didn't want to be naive. I know somebody's been murdered. And so I go to the Prison Coalition office and I say, could I have some background information on the Saunier case? And they said, sure. And they pulled out the files. And I opened up the one on the top of the pile. And there was a newspaper from a little town called New Iberia. And the paper's called the Daily Iberian. And right there on the front page are the smiling faces of 2 beautiful teenage kids. Their family had sent their prom picture to the newspaper. And there was the terrible headline, "Teenagers Found Murdered." David LeBlanc, 17 years old. Loretta Book, 18 years old. And then I read the story. of this man that I was visiting and his brother. And I could see their humanness. I know that. I knew it. But then I read the details of what they did. And these beautiful kids who had gone to a football game on a November night and gone to their Catholic high homecoming football game, and there was a place near a sugarcane field near this little town where teenagers would go to park. And they had gone there to park afterwards. And the two brothers are out in the field, and they're rabbit hunting, and they have 22 rifles. And when David and Loretta Bork were killed, their bodies were found near that field. They had been shot execution style in the back of the head, and Loretta had been raped at least once. And I read that story. I couldn't believe it on one level. I just couldn't put it together with the man with the face and who's so grateful for the visit and the humanness of him and of his brother. And they had done this deed. There was no doubt about it. There was no question about guilt, that they had done it. And I thought, what am I doing? I felt so guilty because here I was visiting with the people who had done this unspeakable murder. And I thought about the poor parents. It's every parent's nightmare that your kid goes out on a Friday night and you never see him alive again. And I thought, what am I doing? And this whole thing of guilt, I'm like with them. I'm the spiritual advisor to the people who kill these innocent kids. And then I thought about the parents. And I had it's like this little nudge, this little pull. I ought to do something for those parents. And then I went, oh, they're not going to want to see me. I mean, they're in grief and rage, and I'm sure they want the death penalty. And Louisiana we were just putting the death penalty back. This was one of the first executions. And I thought, nah, they'll just be angry. And I stayed away. I didn't do anything for the victims' families. Nothing. I didn't write a note. I'm sorry about your son. I'm sorry about your daughter. I'm praying for you. If there's anything I can do to help, nothing. It was a terrible mistake. I had a really good editor when I wrote Dead Man Walking, and in the first draft of this book that I wrote, I really downplayed that mistake. I just said I'd never done it before. And he said, Sister Helen, you're letting yourself off too easy here. It was a big mistake not to reach out to them. And then he just named it for what it was. He said, it was cowardice, wasn't it? I go, yeah. He said, you were scared, weren't you? I said, yeah. And he said, look, you need to deal with that honestly in this book, because then when people are reading your story, if you're honest about your mistakes, they're going to trust you to tell the story. I met the victims' families at the worst possible time you could meet a victim's family, where you couldn't be more polarized. Can you guess where that would be? And it is at a pardon board hearing 1 week before Pat's execution. Both brothers had gotten the death penalty in the beginning. The younger brother's death sentence had been overturned. Pat was the one to be executed 1 week before you have a pardon board hearing. And pardon board hearings are some of the weirdest, unexplainable experiences I've ever had in my life. You have 5 appointees sitting there, appointed by the governor, given instructions by the governor, and as we found out much later, all the instructions from governor to pardon boards are, don't let this thing get close to me. I don't want to get involved in the controversy of it for an execution. You keep this away from me and you deal with it. And so almost all of them always vote to uphold the death penalty and not to give clemency. It's very rare that it ever happens. I don't know anything about the process. But when the pardon board was behind closed doors voting on whether or not Pat Sonier would live or die, and you actually sign a book when you go in which side you're on, life or death. Because you sign, if you're on the side of, for the execution to proceed, that you want death, or on the other side of the register where you sign in, says you want the person to live. I mean, it's probably the closest modern equivalent to being in a Roman amphitheater where your thumb went up for a gladiator to live, or your son went down for somebody to die. And there I was, and we were walking outside while the pardon board was inside voting, and I ran smack dab into the mother and father of David LeBlanc and Loretta Bork. The Borks were furious at me, and I don't blame them one bit for their anger. I'd done it all wrong. They just averted their gaze like that, and they walked quickly past me. And right behind them was Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife Eula, and they had lost David, their only son. Their family name died with David's death. And they walked right up to me. And Lloyd LeBlanc said to me, Sister Helen, he said, we're really good Catholics. We go to Mass. Sister, where you been? He said, all this time, you've been talking to those two brothers, and you didn't once come see us. He said, Sister, you can't believe the pressure on us to be for the death penalty. I went, oh, Mr. LeBlanc, I'm so sorry. He said, Sister, come and pray with me. I pray in this little chapel. We keep vigil before the Blessed Sacrament. And from 4 to 5 in the morning on a Friday morning, he said, Sister, come pray with me. You need to walk in our shoes. You need to know what we suffer. I'm sure these guys give you the really good side of themselves. But these two people killed our boy. And you need to come and be with us. And boy, that was an invitation. I'd done it all wrong, but Lloyd LeBlanc invited me in. And that's an invitation of grace I wasn't about to turn down. So here I am, praying with Lloyd LeBlanc in this little chapel. And I had never knelt alongside a human being. And we were praying the rosary, and where we were reflecting on the agony and passion and death of Jesus. And I'm kneeling by a man who's praying through the agony and death of his only son. And it was as he was praying was where I got the first hint of where his soul was. Because I noticed in the prayer, he included a prayer for Patrick and Eddie Saunier's mother, Gladys Saunier, who lived in a little town and couldn't even go to the grocery store because she'd overhear people saying loud enough for her to hear, there she is, that white trash woman, our son, are the ones who killed the LeBlanc and the Bork children. And people were cutting up dead animals and throwing them on the front porch at night. You can't legalize hatred in a community. You can't say, we're going to make it legal to kill this person for what they did. But now don't hate his mama. Be nice to his family. You can't stop hatred in the community. So all that anger and bitterness was directed toward her. And I noticed that Lloyd LeBlanc included her in his prayer. And then as he grew to trust me, the whole story, he brought me, he was the first victim's family who I was privileged to travel, journey inside with him, that taught me that forgiveness was not first and foremost about relieving the burden of someone else. Because here's how Lloyd LeBlanc talked about it. He said, Sister, when I said all the pressure that was being put on us about the death penalty, he said, Sister, everybody was saying to me, Lloyd, you gotta be for the death penalty or look like you didn't love David. And culture, you have an ultimate loss, we do this for the victim's family. This is going to give closure to the victim's family. This is going to give justice to the victim's family. Everybody was saying that to Lloyd LeBlanc. And they saying things to him like, well, Lloyd, you've had the ultimate loss, your only son died, your family name's going to die with David, and you not seeking the ultimate punishment? What's wrong with you? Did you do something wrong with your boy? Don't you love your boy? How can you not ask for the death penalty? And he was caught. And he saw his wife, Eula, saw her suffering, and he said, Sister, I went there. I said, they are right. I wish I could pull that switch myself. I'd like to see them both get it in that electric chair. And I'd like to see him in pain, and I'd like to see him suffer, because that's what they did. Not just to David, but to Eula and to Vicky, my daughter, and all of us. And he said, I went there full throttle, he said. And then I began to notice about myself. I didn't like the way it made me feel inside. I've always been a person who loves to be kind to people. I love to help people. I'm real good with my hands. I can fix things. He said, you're going to visit my house, you're going to see the lawnmowers, and hey, Lloyd, can you fix this? Hey, Lloyd. And I like to help people. I've been that way since I was a little boy. And all of a sudden now, all this bitterness and hatred's coming into me, and I don't care about their mother. I don't care about anything. I just want to get my justice. And then he finally said, I said, They killed my boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. I'm going to do what Jesus said. And he set his face to go down the road of forgiveness. And he was the one who taught me. Yes, forgiveness, I'm sure, helped those who had done the unspeakable deed. But most of all, it saved his life. Because he wasn't going to let his integrity and the love inside him be lost because of bitterness and hatred. There's an Indian proverb that says, the one who seeks to go on the journey of revenge should first dig 2 graves. Lloyd de Blanc exemplified. And as the man sitting here tonight who lost his sister and has chosen the road, that hatred isn't going to get inside him and direct his life and take over him. Maybe that's what Jesus meant when he said, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Not condone. It never means condone, oh, you killed my son, it's okay. But it's just that we the love in us and the grace of God in us stays intact so that we don't lose that and lose the integrity of our souls, so that we're overtaken by bitterness. Maybe that's what it means. And we have people teaching us all over the place, victims' families that are actually playing a role in the ending of the death penalty in this country. In the last 6 years, 6 states have done away with the death penalty. Nebraska could very well be the next one, because you're just 6 votes away from having enough votes even to overturn the veto. But in New Jersey, when the legislature had the hearings, 62 murder victims' families testified before the hearings saying, don't kill for us. They were some of the main witnesses of saying, don't say you're doing this to help us. And I think it's the last legitimacy that a politician seeks is, we got to do it for the victim's family. We owe this to the victim's family. And now think about that a minute. What made these 62 murder victims' families go before those legislators and say, don't do it for us? And people were really honest. They said things like, yeah, maybe I do want to see him die, but you telling me I'm going to wait 10, 15 years, and then you're going to summon me to go sit in a room and watch 15 years later this closure you promised me, this healing you promised me, and by watching you kill him, that's supposed to heal me? Think of it. Think of it. What are we doing as a society that we would say allowing people who have been hurt by violence to witness violence against the one who did the violence to them is a healing thing. It's a peaceful thing. It's what we promise victims' families. I've been in the killing chambers. I've accompanied 6 people to execution. And I've been in the killing chamber in Texas that really kills people. They've killed over 500 people. And when we look at the Constitution and the way the Constitution's supposed to be applied, everybody's got the same Constitution, right? Well, isn't it kind of funny that in the actual practice of the death penalty, 80% of all executions are happening in the deep South states that practice slavery, where less than 1% of it up in the Northeast? You barely do it. You have it on the books, but you're not serious about it. And look at Texas, 500 people that they have killed. And I mean, you're in that, there's the lethal injection gurney, it's in a well. center, front and center, and it's well lit. And on this side of it are where the 12 witnesses for the state watch as the person's executed. And then up above, kind of even with the head of the person to be killed, is where the representatives of victims' families come to watch this justice. And in the other witnessing chamber, looking square into the face of the one there on the gurney, is where mothers have stood with their hand against the glass and watched as the state killed their child. Who are we? And what does the gospel of Jesus mean for us as a society that even calls itself Christian? We need to look at it. We need to examine it. We need to reflect on it. We need to think about it. Because we can choose life. Is the death penalty a pro-life issue? Well, there's a big difference. Hey, wait, you're not putting these criminals that have done these unspeakable crimes on the same level with unborn children who are innocent, just wanting to have a chance at life. And we draw a big line. Innocent life, guilty life. They deserve what they get. This is the consequences. Sometimes if you've ever been to a death penalty trial, you hear this language coming from the DA, really trying to get that jury to go for death. And they say, don't feel sorry for him. He deserves what he gets. He chose to step across the line. And in this society, we so respect life that we're going to give him death because we so respect life. The life of that innocent victim. Do this for the victims' families. Look at them sitting there today. Give them justice so they have a chance at closure. That's the language. And unveil it, pull it back. It's calling for death. And that's what we're going to do as a society. Sometimes children have the easiest, most direct, quickest way of getting to the truth. One of the lawyers, Bill Quigley, tried to save people's life on death row. He had the case Wayne Feldy. He was reading it by Patrick, his son's bed, because Patrick was going through his little monster thing. You know, the monster's under my bed, Daddy. So Bill would sit there till Patrick went to sleep. And so he says, what are you reading, Dad? He said, well, Patrick, I'm reading Wayne Feldy's case. And he said, well, what did he do, Dad? And Bill said he did something really terrible. He killed a man. He was in a fight in a bar. And in fact, Wayne Feldy was the first time PTSD was ever used at a trial. He had just come back from Vietnam. He got in a fight in a bar and he killed a man. And Patrick says, well, what are they going to do to him, Dad? He said, well, the state of Louisiana, wants to execute him. And then Patrick said, well, Dad, who's going to kill them for killing him? I know some people who've done master's theses on Patrick's question. And here I am, now having met the victims' families and knowing that I got to do something for victims' families. Lloyd LeBlanc, in his graciousness, drew me in and helped me to understand. So we did one thing. We started a murder victim support group. Real help for people who are going through trauma and loss. Real help for people to pray with them and be with them and help them when they fall apart and lose their job and get divorced. 70% of people who lose a child, whatever the fault lines are in the marriage, it breaks apart. That's real help. What if we, who are the believing community of Christians, would imitate Jesus on that cross and reach out to the perpetrators who are in prison, and the other hand out to victims of violence, people who have been victimized, and we reach out to both. We don't choose either or. We do what Christ did. Compassion for all. Are we capable of that? Can we do that? Is that the call inside of us? I end up being there when Patrick's killed. It was unbelievable to me that it happened. I thought when I'd written that first letter that I didn't think anybody was going to get killed. I didn't believe. We hadn't had executions in 20 years in Louisiana. It was right after he was put back. And then we are ratcheting through in this protocol of death. When we were doing the film, Susan Sarandon kept saying, this is so surreal, this process. They put a guard outside Pat's cell for the last 3 days before he's executed to make sure he doesn't try to commit suicide. I mean, we're going to kill you, but you're not going to kill you. And so the guard station, on shifts, 24 hours, make sure he doesn't try to kill himself. In Oklahoma, some guy, 2 weeks before his execution, got some pills, took an overdose of pills. He's unconscious in his cell. They bring him to the hospital. They pump out his stomach. They save his life. And 2 weeks later, they kill him. What does this mean? What is going on here? What are we saying? What are we doing? What is this in our culture? That violence can be redemptive for us. And finally, only violence can be redemptive for us. And so I'm with him in these last 3 days. I'm bolting awake at night. My God, they're going to kill this man. I'm calling the lawyers at 3 in the morning. Can we have a press conference? Can we do something? I've come to know him. I know he and his brother did this unspeakable act. But I've come to know him. I know the journey of his soul. I know that when they would dim the lights on death row at midnight, and he had a modicum of darkness, because you always can look into the cell, he would kneel down by his bunk and open up his Bible. I have his Bible. I have the Psalms he underlined that I never even noticed before. Like Psalm 35, oh God, they plot to take my life, but you are my rock, on you I stand. Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner. All of the prayers of a man who had done an unspeakable deed and finally has to stand in the arms of God to be able to walk to his death with any kind of dignity. And it is finally all about the dignity of human life. When I was walking with Pat Sonia, and he was chained hand and foot, and he said to me, he says, Helen, just pray God holds up my legs when I make the walk. And in this book, I tell you about my dialogue with Pope John Paul. Through the second story in this book, a man by the name of Joseph Odell in Virginia, who always claimed his innocence. I got involved with the case. I was with Joseph when he died. The people of Italy got involved with Joseph Odell. The night he was killed in the state of Virginia, which was just one more execution in one of the big executing states, there wasn't a blink of the eye in the United States about Joseph's death, but 5 million people in Italy stayed glued to their radios to see what happened to Joseph Odell. Pope John Paul hears about Joseph Odell, and I get to have a dialogue with Pope John Paul about the death penalty. And you get a chance to talk to the Pope, you talk straight. Actually, I didn't talk to the Pope any differently than I'm talking to you. And I said, Your Holiness, I read in the Catechism, and it says, the inviolable dignity of innocent life. Well, Your Holiness, when I'm walking with a man to execution, he's been rendered completely defenseless. And he says, Sister, please pray that God holds up my leg. Where is the dignity in this death? Is it only innocent life that we believe has dignity? What about the guilty? And in this book, I tell you what Pope John Paul did about the death penalty and what he changed in the Catechism. And you know, it's great for a pope to do something, right? But that's a guy way, way up there at the top. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, with all of us in the pews, we're the ones that have to make the journey through this, but he definitely showed leadership. And when he came to St. Louis in '99, he had come to the United States 4 other times, never mentioned the death penalty. It was in like a separate category. And the traditional teaching of the church for 1,600 years had been that to protect society, we can take life. Yeah, the state can execute criminals. But it was always about self-defense. It was never about this vengeance thing, they kill, we kill them. Much less throwing in, and it's going to heal the victim's family. And so when the Pope, after he changed the Catechism, that happened in '95, he came to St. Louis in '99, and for the first time, he said, no to abortion, No to physician-assisted suicide. Pro-life issues that we Catholics are very familiar with and that we stand for the dignity of all life. And then he said a no to the death penalty because it's cruel. Our Supreme Court won't acknowledge torture of the death penalty, but the Pope named it. He said it's cruelty and it's unnecessary because, and he had said this in his own encyclical a few years earlier, because we have a way to keep ourselves safe from people who have done violent acts. We don't have to kill people anymore to be safe. For some people, that's one of the main things, is to know that we can be safe. It's not that people were so gung-ho for the death penalty, but if we don't execute them, they're going to get out on parole in a few years, they're going to come out and they're going to kill us. Not anymore. You just check the track record. People who have been sentenced to life without parole are not getting out of prison. Period. You can check it. You can look into it. That we can be safe without imitating the violence. That we don't have to kill people anymore. And Nebraska is so close. I travel all over this place, all over the United States. I just came from Texas. Took a deep breath. But the people of Texas are good people. You know what has been my biggest shock? Is that not that people have thought about the death penalty deeply and are choosing to do it. A lot of people just never think about it because it's not one of the moral issues that touches us personally. I'm delighted that you're here tonight to hear about this. Because if we get it about this issue, we get it about a lot of the issues of what the heart of the gospel of Jesus is. And and there's the Pope, and he says that, and then he adds, even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And what is that basic dignity? Amnesty has said it, international. The UN Convention on Human Rights has said it. Dignity, not to be tortured, not to be killed, is basic dignity for all human beings. And if we got a way to keep ourselves safe, we don't have to give over to the power of the state to kill violent criminals anymore. And we can choose a path of life and walk in a path of life. And we're even learning how terribly expensive it is to sink all those resources, both those trials, all the years of appeal, building the special section of the prison called death row, putting in special personnel, and waiting 20 years, and not really killing people anyway. Well, what about all those unsolved cases? What about the cold cases? What about the at-risk kids? And you know, at first when the economics started coming into this, I went, doggone it. You're telling me that with all the moral arguments we've been making, it's going to be money that's going to be one of the deciding factors about this? Until I heard that Martin Luther King said, one of the most moral documents you ever look at is a budget. A budget. Because we're making choices of our resources to go to life or go to death. Look at the at-risk kids. Look at the drug prevention programs that we could be installing all over the place. Poorer people don't have a chance to go to these fancy places to go get detox and all that. What do poor people do? What do we do about mental health? All the mentally ill people that we have on the streets. All these are life choices for us to make. And what happened to me, when Patrick was executed, he tried to protect me there at the inn, and he said, Sister Helen, you can't watch it. You can't be there, because it'll scar you to see this. It's electrocution. They were going to pump 1,900 volts of electricity through his body. And I looked into his eyes. He's terrified. I would be too. And he said, Sister, you just pray for me. You just pray God holds up my legs, but you can't be there. And I don't know, this whole thing is a story about grace. Looking back on it now, I don't know how I did it. But I know how I did it. It wasn't I alone. It's grace. I said, Patrick, you are not going to die without one loving face to see when you die. I'll be the face of Christ. He was so remorseful for what he had done. He asked forgiveness of the families. right before he was killed. What can you do? You've done this deed. It's done. You can't undo it. What do you do? What happens to your soul? And he looked at my face. And I came out of that execution chamber, middle of the night, dark, vomited. I had never watched anybody be killed in front of my eyes before. And my mission was born that night. It brings me to you in St. Paul, Nebraska. Because I realized I can't, and I said, the people are never going to see this. You're never going to be brought close to this. Your eyes are never going to see this. But I was there. I was a witness. My job was to tell the story. This is 1984. We didn't have a book. We didn't have a movie. We didn't have nothing from nothing. All we have is a nun vomiting outside the prison going, I'm never coming back here again. And there's God's grace. Like, you've been a witness, you tell the story. And I just started talking to whoever would listen to me. And I'm talking about little bitty crowds of people, not crowds. Like St. Christopher Nursing Home, they made an announcement after lunch. Who wants to hear the death penalty? None. Go to Parlor A. And it was after lunch, and 3 people go into Parlor A. And I start talking, and I'm not kidding you, the first 10 minutes, 2 of them are gone. Just a gone pecan. And that one lady was listening. I had my eyes locked with that lady, like, lady, don't leave me. Like, you're it. And I just kept telling the story, and then Providence. Somebody gives me a literary agent in New York. And then that literary agent takes this manuscript of somebody who had never written a book before to one of the best editors who helped me shape this story into a book that's believable and that you can go on the journey. And the first thing he said to me was, you wait too long to talk about the crime. They're not going to read your book, Sister Helen. You a nun, you're a spiritual advisor to a murderer on death row. They're going to think you can't go there. They're going to think you're not going to be honest. You can say, well, God's forgiving. I'm Christian. You got to bring them there. And if you don't talk about the crime unblinkingly in the first 10 pages of this book, nobody's going to read your book. And so the book came out in 94, 93. It's 20-year anniversary. Random House just reissued it. And then I got a phone call as this person called Susan Sarandon, who was filming The Client in Memphis, had to come to New Orleans, and she had to come do a couple of days of filming, and she had read the book. A book is like a child. It goes into anybody's lap. It just makes its way. You don't even have any control over it once it's out there. She said, we need another kind of film in this country that's going to bring people on a much deeper journey than the kind of films we've had, and I'd love to meet you. I said, great. I'd heard about her through Amnesty. I didn't know what the lady looked like. I had to rent Thelma and Louise. See what the lady... see what she looked like when she came in the restaurant. I didn't want to be the only one, not knowing. And then, this is God working with all during Thelma and Louise, I got them mixed up with Gina Davis. So the whole movie, I think she's Gina Davis, who's that ditzy one doing more and more stupid things, and they're getting them in trouble with little Brad Pitt and all this stuff. And I'm going, ooh, I like Louise. So when Susan walks in that restaurant, I said, thank you, Jesus. I told everybody that story but her, of course, till I really knew her. And I said, Susan, I got a confession to make to you. And she goes, Gina Davis. And so we make our way. And so here we are in Nebraska. And we got a chance in Nebraska. In fact, you know how things change? They change because people become awake. And they begin to act out of their beliefs to make the change happen. And many of you are in the district of Senator Sullivan, who's a key vote. Now guess what kind of pressure Senator Sullivan is dealing with in this vote. The way I've seen it happen in the other 6 states, it always happens the same way. That people who are crucial in the vote, the people in the district start letting them know you're standing behind them. And when they know they have people behind them, it gives them the moral strength to make a decision to help Nebraska to end this thing. We're 6 votes away from having enough to even overturn the veto and to stop the filibuster. And that's every one of us in this room tonight. St. Basil in the 4th century one time said, "Annunciations are frequent, incarnations are rare." The annunciations come to us, the invitations. And we are deeply in incarnational religion, of making God live in our flesh, in our blood, in our life. To change laws is to make a change that's going to put Nebraska on the road to life. And I so hope you'll be involved. I so hope. They have these cards, and I think they're going to pass them out to you. They've done a lot of the work for you. All you got to do is sign the card, has the message, and send it in to Senator Sullivan. If you need more time to think, you take time to think, but take the card home with you, okay? Even if you can't make yourself sign it tonight, because you're just not there. And we need to respect that in everybody. And I want to ask you to go on the journey with me and read these 2 books. Because reading, you're quiet, you're not debating, you don't have to be getting into it with anybody. You go to a quiet place. It's kind of like making a little retreat. Both of these books that you get both of them for $25, $15 for one. We have 3 here tonight. If anybody has a rich aunt, they're $100 a piece. They are fundraising books. And all of this money goes into the nuns' Ministry Against the Death Penalty, our little Energizer Bunny group that's been heading out to the church and to put me on the road and for this ministry to end the death penalty by educating the people, you, us. So now we can have a little time for some questions, some conversation together. One other paper, if you'd sign it before you leave, will make you be a part of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, along with Nebraskans for it. So that's just 2 things that I want to call your attention to. Okay, what are your questions? What are the tough ones? Give me the tough ones. What are the ones where it's been the sticking point with you, your uncle, and your grandfather, and everybody for years? Let's talk about it together. Question? Comment? Yeah. Karen. Right, turn it on. A retired correctional officer from the state of Florida.
Yes, ma'am. And currently Florida has approximately 107 on death threat. So the governor who is signed into law to mass executions in the state of Florida. I worked death row for many years, and it's horrible. I would leave from my position because I could not open the cell door to let them get into this and take them to death watch. I was leaving my position.
Wow.
I like that everybody here, regardless of what you think, not only is the people who are working there, is the people who have to deal with this daily, feed them, who know them. The death penalty affects us all. One way or the other, I just pray to God when we can get somewhere all over the United States to some sort of peace, because people like me have been tragically hurt by this type of punishment, and I'm very close to it.
Thank you, Karen. And people are speaking up more and more who've been the guards, who participated in week. And he said, I committed murder. He killed 62 people in the name of Virginia. And he said, I'll be honest, some of those that we got, they had killed a child or something, and I had what you call an executioner's high. Got him. But then we just kept killing people. And And then some of them, there was question of innocence. And then they saying to me, Jerry, that's not your job. Just do your job, Jerry. Just do your job. And after 62, he quit. And he gave the title, where they got the title of the article. He said, I know I committed murder. Because they were defenseless, and I killed them. I was the trigger. And so people live with that. Thank you, Karen, for bringing that out to us. Somebody else, a question? A comment? Yes. Something's wrong with that mic. It's not working. Let me just share with you what I've learned over 20 years about prisons. The first job it happens how passionate happens to them. They get here in the prison, they follow the discipline of the prison, and they do something with their lives. We can never, though, absolutely prevent, because human beings have a need. And people then sometimes do that. What would we have to do in order to utterly prevent that? Have everybody sealed off from everybody else, and then just look at what that does to human beings. Somebody else? Question? Yes, in the back. You can belt it out.
I have two questions. First, have you ever spoken at a college?
About a million times. I speak to a lot of universities.
I've had my friends at college come up to me and just ask me how I can speak out against the death penalty. And I said, well, I can convince you if I had 2 hours of your time, but we have 5 minutes. And so I'm wondering, what's the best thing to just say to someone with the short amount of time that I have in a busy college schedule that would make them think about acting out against the death penalty?
Here are a few things. And just know these are starter questions. You know there's no absolute little formula here. You get your 5 minutes and the nun's going to give you the magic word, you're going to use them, and everybody's going to change. You know that, don't you? So the best thing is to tap into your own experience and say, here's what made me think about it. And were you ever for the death penalty, or as a baby and as a toddler, you were against the death penalty from the beginning of your life?
I was for it at a certain time.
Yeah, okay, me too. I never even thought about it because it was a traditional teaching of the church. And just say, I too was for the death penalty, but there have been some things that have made me think about it. And then what are those things that actually turned you? Is it the fact that so many innocent people, that we have a fallible system? Is it that, do you ever think of the people that have to do the killing for us? And here we're saying we believe in life, but we're going to kill the person.
So we have good people whose job it is to do the killing for us. Do you ever think of what it means to just say that the only thing we can think to do of people who do terrible crimes is to imitate them? We imitate. They killed. So in order to punish them, we got to imitate what they did, and we're going to kill them. Any of those things. And all you're doing there is just saying, think about it. And then you can say things like, go to this, there's a website called DPIC, Death Penalty Information Center. It'll give you all the current information. It'll show you how there's a decline beginning to happen in the United States now, if they want real information. Or if they need to go on a deeper journey or would like to, offer them a book to read. Just say, well, why don't you read this? Or an article you know about. Read this. And then let's talk about it again. If you're open to thinking about it, we can talk about it. Now, some people, the way my editor described these people to me, he said Jesus, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King could be with him on a desert island for 6 years. And they're going to come off that island and they're going to say, fry 'em. Because they're impervious. There's some kind of emotional pain. Either they've been hurt, somebody they know has been hurt, that they're impervious to discussion, and sometimes you may meet people like that. I do. And I know that we're not going to have much of a conversation. That person just isn't there where we can have a deeper conversation. But you can have starter conversations and invite them to reflect. Thank you. Glad you're out there on the college scene. Okay, friends. Yes.
I agree with you saying that you need to educate people. I work with at-risk youth, and I look at them and I start seeing at age 9, at
Yeah.
age 10, at age 11, and when you work with them so often and so many years, you know their mindset, you know where they're going. And I always say, as you age, they don't trust you, and it may take 6, 7, 8 years for them to trust you.
Right.
But I also think that everybody needs somebody just to listen to them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a buddy system, but it's that trust that somebody will have in you. Because sometimes I work with kids, and I've had this said to me, you're just some white lady, you don't know anything. You called it, you're right, I am. However, you know what, I'm colorblind. I don't know what color you are. And I think sometimes that they have anger, they have hatred, not towards you or somebody else, but I just think that they need that outlet. They need to find that relationship, and it's relationship building along with education when they're little.
Yes. And the relationship is everything. What finally did I give to Patrick Saunier? I gave him my presence. You know what? Maybe it's the best gift we ever give each other, is to really be present to each other. And isn't it what we all want the most from our husbands or from our wives or our children or anyone? To truly be present to each other. That's a very, very great gift. And going to prison has taught me that. It's schooled me in that, disciplined me in that. Like being with you tonight, you're the only group of people that exist in the universe tonight. Right out here in the middle of all these cornfields of Nebraska. What am I doing in St. Paul, Nebraska? And because there's somebody named Stacy, and because there are people who are working here and who are awake and conscious and want Nebraska to change, and they invite me, and I'm here. And I have to tell you, it's been a great, great privilege for me to be here with you tonight. And I'll be glad to sign these books for you till the cows come home. And I look forward to meeting you personally. Stacy? Okay.
right to be able to take a whole stack of cards into a senator. It really helps them see that there's a lot of support. And so if you are ready, we would love to gather. We've got baskets out there to gather the cards tonight. Sign both sides, please, because they need, senators need your address on there to know you're actually in the district. Otherwise, because they get communication from people all over the state all the time, and it helps them to know that you're from the district. So other than that, thank you again.